mic'd up now. You guys can hear me? Oh, I can hear me. I don't know what happened to the mission guy. I wish he was here because my first slide was going to be all about mission. So a couple of things. Yeah, I could talk about all kinds of crazy technical stuff all day long. I can tell you a bunch of things you don't want to hear about, right, on how hard some of this stuff is in the federal government. But I think I wanted to focus on a couple of things, right? So I've been at this for 18 months. Some folks who are here kind of have been along with me on the journey from a couple of years ago. I'm so glad you're here because you're going to be so excited. I'm so excited. Everything you said we're doing. So I was super pumped. I was like, yes, somebody else gets it besides me. So it's really important that I kind of walk you through a couple of important lessons learned from my perspective, right? And I'll just give you the quick metric on this. So I was just talking to somebody back there about this. So where we were last year, right? So a year ago, we were on our initial kind of DevOps, and we're gonna containerize everything. We're gonna push all these apps out. Awesome, rah rah rah. Everybody's excited, cheerleading everywhere. And we did, right? We did like 6 releases. It was awesome, right? That's not really DevOps, right? So we did 6, and a total of 57 for the whole year. In the last 90 days, we've done about 60 releases, right? So we've definitely seen now the benefits of having a more mature process, right? Fell along the way a couple of times, and really had to bake in some security stuff and think through it. 100% agree, right? RMF is all about doing DevOps. In fact, that's basically what it's built for. At least that's my perspective, and anybody in the government, we can have that conversation anytime. But one of the big things I learned was, right, you got to have an ecosystem to support this, right? It's not just like, I'm going to build this web app, I'm going to DevOps enable it, I'm going to slap it in a container, and that's all I'm going to do. I think a lesson we learned very early on is that your entire ecosystem, right, and when I mean the entire ecosystem, I mean out to the requirement. And the reason I have this slide is to kind of work through that a little bit and just to have folks think what that means, right? Whether your customer is an ERP user or your customer is a warfighter on the tactical edge, I think we kind of miss the rest of the big picture on DevOps, which is really awesome that I can deploy code in like, I don't know, less than a minute out to production for my development environment. But if it takes me 18 months to figure out what my requirement is, we have a problem, right? So that's part of this, right? Is that ecosystem includes this other piece that we don't talk about, right? It's the requirements DevOps piece, right? And I wanted to put that slide up there just to kind of to show that why we've been successful and why we've been able to release as fast and as much as we have is really because of having that requirements tie in directly to a tactical warfighter, right? So I think back in the day, you'd see this long chain, right, from a warfighter saying, hey, I need X, to getting to somebody like me to go build it, right? Honestly, right, even fast, you're looking at 120 days. That's a quick reaction capability. I'm talking about doing that in milliseconds now. I think the greatest example we have is we've actually done one in about 6 hours, right? So from a requirement coming from somebody sitting in a theater in combat to being deployed on a production network, about 6 hours, right? That's the difference, and that's the delta, and that gets to the mission piece. I'll give one more piece on the mission piece because it's important for those folks who are trying to still convince their CISOs and their CIOs. Right? This is a scary metric. I'm going to give you close numbers, not real ones, because people will get upset. So 3 years ago, about 4 years ago, $120 million budget. Today, $52 million budget, around there, right, to do a lot of stuff. But that's like a 60% decrease in budget, probably 3 times as much capability. That is not a joke, right? So when you want to make the sell, the money sell is really there. It's not just a warfighter sell and speed of delivery. It's the cost. Right, dramatically bringing down those costs. So think about that when you're doing this, right? Is what does that larger ecosystem look like? Because you got to be able to go tooth to tail on this stuff. Here's a process, right? Great. I think most people in this room really understand or should have a pretty good understanding of what a DevOps kind of process looks like. I wanted to throw up there to say, hey, one of many tools in your toolkit, situation dependent. Right? Everybody's environment's a little different. Everybody's requirements a little different. So think through that, right? Think through what that looks like. Not everybody needs a whole host suite of tools around it. Sometimes you just need a smaller footprint to get this stuff done. If it's not, a speed of need, in our case, it is definitely a speed of need. If it's more of a security thing, you may think about some other capabilities out there to support. Sorry, I'm looking at this while I'm talking here. Back to the ecosystem, right? Super important. So for those who are in the big data landscape, right, we've all got platforms if you're in that space, and we've all got tools, right? So once again, think about what you want to use to do that. So what helps us with speed is having that ecosystem, and at the core of that ecosystem, having some base capability from a platform perspective to operate. Obviously, that's different whether it's on-prem or off-prem, right? There's challenges. It changes a little bit, but I think that's something to think about. Is what is that core capability that you got to push out? And by the way, I'm breezing through this so I can get to the more interesting things. So here's the number one thing, right? So how many Govies do I have in the room right now? Please, somebody raise their hand. Oh, this is scary. All right, well, I know you are. All right, awesome. So this is the most important piece. So 18 months, here's the most important lesson I learned. I had to give you a really complicated DoD chart because I love them. But governance, right? So all I hear about every time I talk to somebody is, oh, there's no governance in DevOps. On the contrary, I would say that my governance has gone up, right? And not just up a little bit. To the point that, at least as an AO on a network, this is the very first time that I ever really understand the risks I'm taking. And I feel very comfortable when I push out a piece of code that I know what challenges I have in front of me. And I don't say that in a light way at all. I think it's a huge deal. The ability to see at a very fine grain and with a lot of fidelity on not only what your risk is, but programmatically what you've actually pushed out, and being able to bake in, right, whether it be configuration management, risk management framework controls, right? I cringe, right? And really getting that in one shot as you deploy is a huge deal. Most organizations that I talk to, especially in DoD, I hear things like, what's an SDD? So for those of us who are in the software business, right? So I don't know where my software development document is, or design document. Yeah, I don't think CM actually has that, Leo. Do you guys have the source code? Well, we don't really know where that is. Maybe it's at a vendor site. Oh my God, right? I'm already starting to shake and saying, how do I even prove that I bought this? But those are the kind of things that you get to wrap together. So think about that, right? Because really, whether it be a CIO or a CISO, right, pushes back, the reality is not only should they not be pushing back, but they need to start talking to folks who are actually doing this and see it in real life, right? Being able to see that single sheet of glass that really shows all these pieces, parts in one place. And honestly, it really saves you on the human capital, right? This is where you can move a lot of the overhead, that ordinality we have in organizations, and put it back to mission, which is huge. So complicated chart. Please do not send me anything on LinkedIn that somebody published this, because a lot of people keep pushing this chart out. All right, look, this is real. The culture problem is real, right? It's a challenge. It's the hardest part. Next to, this is an ungoverned space. This RMF doesn't support this. I can give you 50 things that I hear all the time. I think this is a big one, right? So I love this chart because I always say I don't know what side of the fence I'm on this. Sometimes I'm on the developer side. Sometimes I'm on the compliance side. But I think it's important to work some of these big ones, right? Here's a couple of things that I have found, right? Switching up the entire way we look at actually pushing software out, right? So I think, Agile's great, but now you're pushing a release every day. So how do you have those conversations? And really front-loading those conversations, and that's what's happened, right? We've had to front-load those conversations in really small micro moments of capability, right? And risk assessment, and it's really brought not only just the team closer together, but it's done one other thing. I think we found that we understand our risk a lot better, right? And our developers definitely now are baking that into even, oh, hey, I got to write this next set of code. Oh, hey, sometimes it's, hey, Leo said, right? But a lot of times it's, hey, we realized that the last 3 deployments, we got hit on this through our pipeline, and it knocked us off. Oh, well, why? And that's important, right? That builds that cohesion. The fail fast piece is my favorite part, right? So I'm not kidding. Our first, Mike, what was our first 3 deployments? How messy was that? It was a hot mess, right? So we wrote some code, We slapped it in a container, we pushed it through our pipeline, and it failed like within 5 seconds, right? 5 seconds failed like every single check we wanted to do. We're like, oh boy, how are we gonna do this? And then we spent a good 3 months after that having a conversation on, which is a good question for you, on risk thresholds, right? So you've got all this automation now, right? You've got all this, all these security checks baked in. How do you determine what your risk level is, right? So you're using a third-party Java library, right? There's some like 3 lines of code that nobody's used in a decade. Is that a risk? I don't know, right? My answer to that is, it depends. And then again, and you have a red line. So I have red lines as an AO. This is not allowed. This is never going to get on the network, right, if these vulnerabilities are in there. How do you start building that sandwich, right, where things can push through? That's a really important piece. So I want everybody who's talked to their AOs and their cybersecurity folks and their accreditation folks to think about what I just said and what does that mean from a human capital perspective, right? So what I just said is that your AO now has to be intimately involved in the software development process. Wow, right? So that 5-year-old strut vulnerability that's in some library somewhere that nothing that you've built is pointing to, right? Is that a vulnerability? That has to be triaged, right? And a decision has to be made. So think through that and what that means is, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years on the type of folks and how we need to train not just our AOs, but our cybersecurity folks around that. And that bottom one is an important one, right? Because it really does. What I found more than anything else is it gets everybody on a level playing field on the cybersecurity side. Not just from, hey, we're in a container, but really starting to push the envelope and understand it to the point where I think when we first started, what do we have? Well, we're going to put an entire version of Linux SE inside our container. That's great, because that was the only STIG that was available. By the way, Alpine still doesn't have a STIG. I'll just say that. Thank you, Dissa. Please work on that. But instead of waiting, right, I just made the case. So let me get this right. So a 5 meg file versus an entire OS with a bazillion vulnerabilities that the open source community and hopefully Red Hat will take care of. We're going to depend on them, or I could put a 5 meg files with a lot less threat vectors on it into a container. And you guys say I can't do that. So what did I do? I made my network safer, and I used Alpine and said go, right? Until somebody comes up with a stick. But it's important, right? Because those are those lessons learned that we got as we were doing this. So just, like I said, a couple of things to think about based on my experience. And I know a little security heavy. So I'll say this for the vendors and integrators out there. So this is a little different. I usually don't talk about these things, but I will today, because I think that part of our ability to really push out right now has been modeling our SLAs around really our DevOps process, right? So I think you said it great, right? The contracting issue and what's in 5,000 makes it a little bit challenging. But I think this is a new mindset, right? So how do you, right, and some of this is on the government, build contracts that are definitely provide the leeway and the ability for vendors and integrators to come in and really be enablers to the fight, right? Because at the end of the day, right, we're all teammates here, right? We're all trying to get to the same end state and push capability out. So we spent a lot of time on this right here over the last, and I'd say a little bit longer than we've been doing the DevOps piece, but definitely thinking about what those SLAs look like, right, and how we partner up together. I know this is definitely not the sexy part of this, but it's an important part, and it's probably one of the most important business parts, right? I think, I talked to a lot of folks in the department, and the first thing I asked them before the technology, before the human capital, before all that is, do you have a contract that's structured to support what you're trying to do? And it's important. So just think through that. And for the integrators and the vendors out there, that's a conversation to have with your clients, right? And obviously not for the recompete, but to think about if you do have SLAs in place, how do you help your client to shape those SLAs to be an enabler for not just them, but for you to get stuff done. So I didn't want to talk through all that, but all right. I think folks know this, right? Just industry best practice. And I'll be honest, I have some challenges there, right? We're challenged not as much in the National Capital Region. We do have a lot of skill set here in this area. But I think we're more challenged in some other places. I would say that we're behind in many ways at some of our labs. definitely within DoD, and as we modernize, we'll start catching up there. So that's something to start thinking about, right? It's how do we start building up that human capital to support some of these efforts? And I know that those folks who are still on the kind of emerging end of the DevOps kind of world, right? Or even pre that, right? Just trying to get their development efforts into more of an agile mindset. These are the things you got to start thinking about, right? And you got to start talking to leadership about is speed of delivery, definitely the up game in security. And I think the other piece is shaping the workforce to support that. And that's across the board, right? I know I'm sitting up here as a government guy. Yes, we have our own workforce challenges, but I think on the integrator side too, I'm seeing that. One more thing to be conscious of as you start looking at this stuff is, are you ready to do a huge lift and shift? And I say that, and everybody's going to say, what's Leo talking about? But from a people perspective, here's what I found. So in the last 18 months, I've probably done, I'm going to be close in numbers here, about a 30% lift and shift of personnel and skill set to get here. Very challenging in the government space, even on the integrator space, being able to find the skill set that fast, bring it in, and reshape the workforce to do that. I really think that's real. Right? I think that's what the future is going to look like. So how do we set up a framework to be able to do that? That has been my experience, to keep momentum going in some kind of cycle where you're modernizing for 6 months, innovating for 6 months, modernizing for 6 months, innovating for 6 months. That shift back and forth is a huge people lift and shift of skill set. So I think start thinking about what that looks like. I think we've done a pretty good job, kind of stumbled the first time, but we've almost had to bake that into how we do business and be very thoughtful out 1-2 cycles from where we're going, kind of down from a roadmap, a technical roadmap perspective. I put a couple of bullets there because I get excited about how fast stuff is changing. But I will say this. Definitely from a CI/CD perspective and from a security perspective, this is where you want to be. I talk to folks that are transitioning to RMF still, which is no comment. And I think if you want to do this very deliberate and you really want to stay within the spirit of it, you're going to have to start using some of these capabilities, right? And we're really going to have to go more to a DevOps model. Definitely, I'm a big fan. I think the Docker folks will tell you on the container end for a million reasons, more from an AO cybersecurity reason. And I think the other piece is just from a flexibility of delivery reason. I think you had a great example, right? Like, so we're going to deploy somewhere in Djibouti, right? I don't want to send a team out there to stare up servers or try to send a VM that's not going to integrate with the hypervisor there and do all that mess, right? It's a lot easier to just flip a switch and send a container out there and, hey, your web app's up, everything's kind of ready to go, and it's a config file at that point. I think that's the future. I would say that the commercial space is definitely figured out, and I'm going to be real clear on what I mean by the commercial space. The non-federal government supporting commercial space, right? And I don't mean that in the disparaging way. I mean that in the way that I mean that, right? I think we have seen the most innovation from the strangest places, right? Capital One. Thank God for Capital One. They hooked me up the other day. But those are the things. So I'll give you, and that's a great example. So I'll leave you that, and then I'll go to questions, because I do want to leave this very important point, especially on the government side. Don't be afraid of industry, please, and of the commercial space at all. I think the biggest lift I've gotten so I got a huge lift from Docker. I'll give a shout out to the Twistlock guys, because they've been huge partners with us. But as an AO, I had a fundamental problem, right? So I'm like, great, we've got this DevOps pipeline, but guess what? I'm looking at 20 different tools to understand what is going on, right? You know, what Jenkins is doing. I need to see, you know, what I'm getting from my security products, which I will not name because there's several. And I just couldn't see it all in one place, and it was driving me nuts. And I was at the point where, like, let's build some custom dashboard, dumb idea, to figure this out. So we went out and we asked the question, right, to folks that we knew. And Capital One's like, hey, by the way, we're about to deploy this thing called IGEO, which kind of does that for you, and it's all plugged into your software. I'm like, get out of here, right? So within 24 hours, yes, in DoD, that was on the network, right? And all of a sudden, it was like the greatest day ever for me. I'm like, oh my God, somebody solved this problem in the commercial space. Had no idea, but they have the same problem we do. So think about that, right? Think about talking to those commercial partners, because a lot of times they're ready to go, right? They've got the solution in place. Either they've already open sourced it, definitely willing to share it with you. I would say I haven't met that many people in this area, but definitely folks in the insurance side of the house for insurance companies and healthcare, a couple of folks in the financial sector. They've definitely been partners in this, probably more than anybody else, to kind of help us move the ball down the field. All right, that being said, questions, because I love questions and I'm a talker, and you get my speed of production. I didn't know that slide was in there, but now I do. The constant fight. I do like the assembly line stuff. So for folks who've heard me talk before on my frustration in general, it's software development. I'd say in the federal space, one of the challenges we have is about 80% of the federal space is the guy on the assembly line, right? And I'm like, God, guys, it's not 1970. We're not building cars and putting bolts on screws, right? Like, we have capability now where we don't have to do that. What I need you to do is be a PLC programmer and come back here and work on this robot arm, right? So I'm going to leave it at that because that has a lot of implications and ramifications, right? But that's really where we're at right now, right? And we're doing a disjustice. And again, Leo's personal opinion does not reflect those of the Department of Defense. You get my legal disclaimer for the day, right? I gotta say it or I'll get in trouble. We're at a point right now where there's significant changes. The technology's there, and it's going to be very disruptive to not just the federal workforce, but the commercial industry that supports that federal workforce. But we have to be honest about where we are, because if we don't make that leap, right, other nation states will make that leap for us, right? And I think that gets to your point. I think that's a valid point. Do we want to be behind the curve, right? So when a warfighter gets a new disruptive EW type problem, and I've got an algorithm that I can deploy in 1 hour, if my AO is telling me it's going to take 30 days to get that accredited, we've already lost the fight. So that's the impact, right? There's a direct correlation there, and that means lives. So we really got to think about that and move over that workforce piece. And I think for our industry partners, and I'm really big on this, I think it's a national security imperative that we get our workforce up to speed across the board, and that we build a pipeline. And I'll start at K. Right? K through person working in a NOC right now, right? There needs to be that pipeline set up, and it's a public-private partnership thing at this point. It almost is at the point where, do we have a Manhattan Project that's all about how we deliver software better and how we become competitive in the software business to support the warfighter. All right, that being said, questions?
About a mission, which thank you for raising that, because this is not just a technology, because if we're late to market, we're probably not in cyber warfare, right?
You got it.
So how do we get, it's not just a case of taking our current information assurance people, who frankly historically been known as cops, right? They're the cops.
Compliance officers.
Compliance officers, right? Whatever you put them, right? And good ones, and they have their job to do. But now we're asking to be a different type of person. We're asking to be part of the IPT of the software development team. Part of configuration control, so that when you do DevOps, by the time you're ready to deploy, they're already bought in, and effectively your SAP is updated, your configuration management is done, and everybody's ready to go, and you can deploy it in hours.
Yep.
It's just not a case of taking the same people,
sure,
lift and shift it.
Right. So, and I'll give you my honest answer on that, since I'm not going to say I don't struggle with this problem, right, within the workforce and with other folks I talk to, and I'm going to give you it takes time. Right? So a couple of things, right? Retool, reskill, and in some cases redeploy. I'll let you guys figure out what all that means, but that's real, right? I mean, those are the options we have. I will tell you, and again, Leo's opinion, and just what I've seen in the space, and talking to other AOs, we're probably still another 2-3 years away before a predominant amount of even the authorizing officials are at the point where they're looking at cybersecurity and accreditation from a risk perspective versus a compliance perspective, right? So I think that's going to take time. There's a big human capital shift that has to do that, but I think there's a lot of training that needs to go with that. On the software side, I will say this. It is a training and new skill set issue that needs to be addressed, because
We got to that stage where we actually know what that new skill set is, or what that new information assurance, AO, what type you want.
Where are my NIST people at? Because they're working on this right now.
Because that's a different.
Yeah, I think I get asked that question a lot, right? I've taken a hack at it with some folks over at NIST. I've given it to some folks over at the FCS Cyber Committee. There's a bunch of other groups that are working that. I think we're still trying to figure that out. I would translate that a little different and say, on the federal side, my job right now is not covered under any position description that OPM has. In fact, my job technically doesn't exist. What my position description says in no way reflects what I actually do. And I don't think anyone's even graded a position description that looks like that, right? So we've got, that is a very large problem. And somebody's got to ask a question. People always have questions. No questions?
I got a question.
Ask away.
Look, we've chatted with for a long time on this. Give us one of the things that I like to understand is the time frame it took for you to go from an organization not ready, even with you and understanding the value of it, how long, just time frame and obstacles it took you from start, wait a second, we presented to you in a boardroom somewhere, this makes sense, this could help warfighter, to an active system that was delivering, right, this content. Just to give us a context of how, sort of the fight.
From a DevOps perspective or from at speed? Two separate questions. All right, and I'll give you both. So from a DevOps perspective, from the day in the parking lot where I was on a cell phone and I called my chief architect and said, hey, we should probably containerize stuff, which that's pretty much the decision-making process sometimes. I'm like, this just makes sense. That was about 24 months. I think that's fair. It was about a 24-month process. If you went back and went 24 months before that, so I'm talking 4 years ago, to really shift the entire workforce to Agile, and when I mean entire workforce, I mean everything, process, CM, TTPs, how you look at security, all that. So really from if right now, if you're doing software development, if your vendor's doing it, it's not on site, you don't have any of the code, you have none of the processes, you don't have the human capital to support it. If you had to do it on your own, I would be honest, I think it would take 4 years. Be a 3 to 4 year transformation, a significant one. It would also be a human capital change of about 40% of your workforce. That doesn't necessarily mean get rid of them. It means different skill sets coming in. And it would take about that long. If you're already in a very agile environment, you have some amount of control over, development environments, IT, stuff like that, and you kind of got that kind of mature, 24 months. I think 24 months is pretty good. It's a 2-year transition. That was my experience, right? And again, with a little bit more flexibility than a lot of folks have, as far as being the AO and being in charge of the technology, that kind of helps. But even not being in that space, I think I'm watching a couple of other organizations go through this right now at a much smaller scale within, whether it be a program office or inside a PEO, and they're about a year in, and I would say, and a lot of lift from folks like me and a lot of folks in the commercial space, they're moving at about the same clip we did. So it takes time. I mean, that's my honest answer.
Leo, for the products that you're pushing, thank you. Right. For the products that you're pushing at DevOps Pace, how much of those are targeted at your business level applications, and how many of those are targeted at your weapon systems?
It's my new favorite question. Yes, 0.
You probably got a better answer now.
0. I don't do business applications. Bam.
Good.
That's my answer.
That's a
I
good
do
answer.
mission only. So, and it's important because guess what? Again, Leo's opinion. Low-hanging fruit in the Department of Defense, business applications. Like, honestly, we should, I don't even want to talk about that because I'm like, yeah, I'm not in that business. That's easy stuff, right? I'm going to be honest with you. That's my opinion, right? Like, I could hire a couple of college kids to rebuild DT. Oh, we're already doing that. Digital Defense Services is doing that right now, right? Hey, their model's right. Like, I don't know why there's a $50 million program to support it. By the way, if there's any vendor that's actually on that contract, sorry. But that's the, okay, but that stuff's cheap, right? I'll give you another example around that because I love it. Somebody just came to me and said, hey, we're going to build this enterprise search. And I'm like, well, how much are you spending on it? They're like, $5 million. I'm like, $5 million? I'm like, my exact response was, okay, I'm a government guy. I will take leave and build what you want at home tonight and give it to you. like stigged and ready to go, right? Like, come on, guys. But I think, to answer your question, I do mission only. If it doesn't support the warfighter, you're not going to get that through my DevOps pipeline. I won't even entertain it. I think there's other folks who can work on IT business system reform, and they can go figure that out. But again, my opinion is that's low-hanging fruit. I will tell you this, that everybody I've talked to in the commercial space, I've not talked to a single person, anybody, anywhere in the commercial space, remember, non-DoD supported commercial space, who has told me that they build their own ERP, that they build their own logistics system, that they build their own financial management system. They don't. There's a reason. Not a lot of return on investment there, right? But it is low-hanging fruit. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I will probably get fired for saying that.
If I may, did you have to do a justification, get budget and approval to proceed with this, or you independently wealthy?
First of all, if I was independently wealthy, I would not be here. I'm just
Thank
going
you.
to tell you that right now. Not going to happen. No, so that's actually a good question. So no, I had to do this within the budget constraint that I already had. That a little bit challenging, right? I think at first, but we did do. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, about 3 little mini POCs, right, with some failure rate in there that really got everybody excited and really helped me push it over the goal line. And I did get some additional budget just to expedite the process. That's another thing. And I'm going to say this, and please believe me, because everybody who doesn't do this, they fail. And then I get to go back and say, I told you so. Start small, right? I can give you our ConOp, which has all these tools and all this stuff, and it works, and it's this moving machine, but I'm giving you an aircraft carrier. Like, just build a dinghy, right? Build a dinghy, make sure it floats, make sure you can get from point A to B. It's going to be slow. It's not going to be that safe, right? Build an aircraft carrier down the road. I think that's the biggest thing right there, right? Get that momentum going, because remember, you got all these other fights you're fighting at the same time, right? And to really get that momentum, you gotta start real small, and that'll get you there. So a very small budget in this space can get you a long, long way. Does that answer your question? Yep. All right. By the way, so I'm another Navy guy. So you got how many Navy people here today? Submarine guy though. Any other questions?
I should probably know this, but is this posted anywhere, like, for other DoD customers internally for DoD or government customers to find out, like, what you did, how you did it, lessons learned, that maybe Gov2Gov?
So I am willing to share Gov2Gov anytime. There's a couple, if you guys do all-day DevOps that CMU hosts, you'll find out that my slides are everywhere now throughout the entire world. Smart job. That wasn't on purpose, but it happened. Yeah, I'm willing to share. I don't have it posted anywhere per se for folks to get at it. I mostly do. I do a lot of point-to-point, and especially on the government side, because I want them to have the conversation to know what they're getting into. And I'll tell you, and I think Mike has one of my guys has a copy of our ConOp around this, right, which kind of lays out, hey, what does this look like? From a mission perspective, what are we supporting? What does this look like? What capabilities and tools are we using? And from a people perspective, how does this work? With a little bit of process policy, how it ties to RMF. It's pretty in-depth. It's like a little mini Bible. And I tell everyone, I can give you this, and I'll give it to you. That does not necessarily mean that the way I'm doing it makes sense for you. Right? So I usually like having a little bit of a conversation, understand what they're trying to get at. And I will give you a good example. So F-35 is a great one, right? So firmware on devices for material solutions, it's a whole different problem set, right? So we're really good at what we do. I can push out a bazillion apps, a bazillion web apps out there, analytics, set up to do that. You want me to push out specific algorithm to go on a piece of hardware? The way I'm doing it, probably not the right way. In fact, I know it's not the right way. There's other ways to do it. So there's some considerations on that. Does that answer your question? But yeah, I'm willing to share it if I get Gov2Gov. Any other questions? How many people think I got fired today somehow?
Promoted.
Nope. That's only in the commercial space, folks. All right, that being said, I think I'm good.
Somebody commercial will pick you up.
Eventually.